The champagne glass shattered against the wall, missing my head by inches. The restaurant fell silent as every eye turned to our table, my wife Rebecca, her lover James, and me, all frozen in a moment that would change everything. What everyone watching didn't know was that this confrontation was exactly what I had planned for. 5 years of marriage, a hidden prenuptial clause, and months of collecting evidence had led to this perfect moment of justice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Michael Anderson. At 34 years old, I had built a reputation as one of Seattle's most meticulous corporate lawyers. The detail hunter, they called me at the firm, a nickname I'd earned by finding the hidden clauses and overlooked loopholes that saved our clients millions. What nobody realized was that this obsessive attention to detail extended to every aspect of my life, especially my marriage. I grew up watching my parents' relationship disintegrate because of my father's blind trust. David Anderson had been a brilliant surgeon who never questioned anything my mother told him, even when the signs of her affairs were painfully obvious to everyone else. The night he discovered the truth, I found him sitting in his study, divorce papers in hand, hollowed, out by betrayal. "Always protect yourself first, Michael," he told me, his voice barely a whisper. "Love is beautiful, but it can destroy you if you're not careful." Those words shaped me. While my colleagues rushed into marriages that ended as quickly as they began, I approached relationships with caution. When I met Rebecca Taylor at a charity gala 6 years ago, I was immediately captivated by her, the artistic director of Seattle's most prestigious gallery, with her striking red hair and infectious laugh. She was passionate where I was restrained, spontaneous where I was calculated. She pulled me out of my shell, and for the first time I understood what it meant to truly connect with someone. But my father's words never left me. When I proposed to Rebecca after a year of dating, the prenuptial agreement was non-negotiable. What made ours different, however, was a special clause I had crafted myself, one that my own firm would later call the Anderson provision in documents for other cautious clients. "This is standard for someone in my position," I explained, as Rebecca skimmed the thick document in my downtown apartment, the Space Needle visible through the floor-to-ceiling. "Windows." She nodded absently, her artist's eyes more interested in the sunset's colors than legal jargon. "Just the usual financial protections," I added, not mentioning page 17, paragraph 4, the infidelity clause with its substantial penalties. Rebecca signed without reading the full agreement, something that both relieved and troubled me. "There," she said, sliding the document across my glass coffee table. "Now, can we talk about something more interesting than your trust issues?" She smiled when she said it, but there was an edge to her voice that I chose to ignore. Our wedding at the Woodland Park Rose Garden was everything Rebecca wanted. Artistic, unconventional, filled with her gallery friends and my more reserved legal colleagues. My father, by then remarried to a kind woman who'd never dream of betraying him, pulled me aside during the reception. "You took precautions?" he asked, eyeing Rebecca as she charmed a group of potential gallery donors. When I nodded, he seemed to relax slightly. "Good. Now try to enjoy being happy." And for 3 years I was. Rebecca transformed our minimalist apartment into a warm home filled with emerging artists' works. We hosted dinner parties where her creative friends and my analytical colleagues created an unusual but stimulating mix. On weekends, she dragged me to obscure art installations and experimental performances I would never have experienced otherwise. "I worked too much," she complained about it. We compromised, the normal rhythm of married life. The first sign came in our 4th year of marriage. Rebecca started working late at the gallery, preparing for a major exhibition featuring an artist from New York named James Wilson. I thought nothing of it until I noticed the change in her. The extra time on her appearance each morning, the new clothes, the secretive smiles at text messages she quickly deleted. "James is brilliant," she would say over dinner, her eyes brightening. "His understanding of form and negative space is revolutionary." Soon it was "James thinks" and "James says," punctuating every conversation. Still, I told myself it was professional admiration, nothing more. After all, I had built a career on evidence, not suspicion. Then I came home early one evening to find our apartment empty, Rebecca's gallery exhibition having supposedly run late. On our kitchen counter sat her iPad, forgotten in her rush. I'd never invaded her privacy before, but something, instinct perhaps, or my father's voice in my head, made me pick it up. Her password was the same one she used for everything. Matisse 1889, her favorite artist's birth year. The messages between her and James were unmistakable. Photos, plans, declarations, evidence of hotel meetings during supposed business trips, detailed critiques of our marriage and my shortcomings. I read everything, took screenshots, sent them to myself, and then carefully replaced the iPad exactly as I had found it. That night, when Rebecca returned home flushed and apologizing for being late, I kissed her cheek and told her I'd ordered her favorite Thai food. We ate while she enthusiastically described the exhibition preparations, James's name peppering, her stories. I smiled and asked questions as if my world hadn't just imploded, as if I wasn't already calculating how to proceed. For the next 3 months, I lived a double life. By day, I was the attentive husband supporting his wife's big gallery opening. By night, I documented every meeting between Rebecca and James, hiring a private investigator recommended by a client. To gather additional evidence, I learned they had been involved for 7 months. I discovered they had plans for after the exhibition opened, plans that involved her leaving me. What they didn't know, what Rebecca had never bothered to read, was that page 17, paragraph 4, stipulated that proven infidelity would result in her forfeiting any claim to our shared assets, plus a penalty equal to 20% of my annual income for each month the affair continued. More importantly, it contained a clause about public embarrassment and reputational damage that would be triggered by specific circumstances. As the exhibition opening approached, I made my own preparations. I scheduled our 5th anniversary dinner at Canlis, Seattle's most exclusive restaurant, for the night after the gallery opening. I made sure Rebecca invited her entire professional circle to the opening, where James's work would be the centerpiece. I arranged for our anniversary dinner reservation to be made known to James through mutual connections. The gallery opening was a triumph. Rebecca glowed as Seattle's art elite praised her vision in featuring James's work. I stood by her side, champagne glass in hand, nodding appreciatively at the abstract sculptures that meant nothing to me. James kept his distance, playing the role of the artist who barely knew the gallery director, but I caught their stolen glances, the brush of hands when they thought no one was looking. "You've outdone yourself," I told Rebecca sincerely. Her curation was impeccable, regardless of her personal involvement with the artist. She seemed surprised by my enthusiasm, even a little guilty. "Thank you for being so supportive," she said, squeezing my hand. "I know modern art isn't really your thing." "Tomorrow night is our night," I reminded her. "I've got something special planned for our anniversary." A flicker of discomfort crossed her face. "About that? I might need to stop by the gallery first. Some collectors want a private viewing." "No problem," I said smoothly. "Our reservation isn't until 8. Take all the time you need." The next evening, Rebecca texted that she would meet me at the restaurant. I arrived early, confirming with the maitre d' that everything was arranged according to my specifications. I chose a table with a clear view of the entrance and ordered a bottle of Rebecca's favorite champagne. At 8:15, Rebecca arrived, looking stunning but slightly flustered. "Sorry I'm late," she said, kissing my cheek. "The collectors had endless questions." "It's our anniversary," I replied, pouring her champagne. "Nothing else matters tonight." We ordered, reminisced about our wedding, discussed plans for a possible trip to the Amalfi Coast. To anyone watching, we were the perfect couple celebrating a milestone. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. At 8:45, exactly as I had anticipated, James Wilson walked into Canlis. The maitre d', as instructed, led him directly to our table. "Mr. Wilson," he announced, "as requested." Rebecca's face drained of color. "James, what are you doing here?" James looked confused, his eyes darting between Rebecca and me. "You asked me to meet you for a celebratory drink about the exhibition." He was holding a small gift bag, jewelry, I later learned, that he had bought with money from the sales of his artwork at my wife's gallery. I stood, extending my hand. "James Wilson, I've heard so much about you. Please, join us. We're celebrating our 5th anniversary." The confusion on his face deepened. "Anniversary? But Rebecca, you said." He stopped, finally registering the situation. Rebecca's champagne glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. "Michael," she began, her voice shaking, "this isn't what it looks like." I finished for her. "I think it's exactly what it looks like. You invited your lover to our anniversary dinner. That's quite bold, even for an artistic temperament." James took a step back. "I should go." "Actually," I said calmly, "I'd prefer if you stayed. There are some details about Rebecca's situation that you should be aware of." The restaurant had gone quiet, the Seattle elite witnessing the drama unfolding at our table. I gestured for James to sit. Remarkably, he did, perhaps too shocked to do anything else. "Michael, please," Rebecca whispered. "Not here." I ignored her, retrieving a folder from my briefcase. "Did Rebecca ever mention our prenuptial agreement?" I asked James conversationally, as if discussing the weather. He shook his head mutely. "I didn't think so. Rebecca didn't actually read it herself, though she signed it willingly enough." I opened the folder and slid a document across the table. "Page 17, paragraph 4 is particularly relevant to your relationship." As James reluctantly looked at the highlighted section, Rebecca lunged for the document. I calmly moved it out of her reach. "To summarize," I continued, "Rebecca's affair with you has triggered several clauses. First, she forfeits all community property. Second, she owes me damages amounting to approximately $210,000 for the 7 months your relationship has continued. Third, and this is important for you to understand, James, this public confrontation, which she created by inviting you here, activates the reputational damage clause." James looked up, confusion giving way to anger. "What the hell are you talking about?" "It means," I explained, "that Rebecca's gallery, which I helped finance, reverts to my ownership. The building, the business, everything except her personal artwork." I turned to Rebecca, whose fury had rendered her speechless. "Which means, effectively, that you no longer control the exhibition of James's work, nor the commission structure, nor the sales proceeds that haven't yet been processed." James stood abruptly. "This is insane. Rebecca, you told me your husband was just a silent investor. You said after the exhibition, you were going to both disappear with the proceeds from his newly inflated art prices." I finished. "A clever plan, except for page 17, paragraph 4. The champagne glass that had been sitting in front of Rebecca now came flying past my head, exploding against the wall behind me. The restaurant fell completely silent. You planned this, Rebecca hissed, standing up. You manipulated this entire situation. I remained seated, straightening my tie. I simply created circumstances where the truth would reveal itself. As a lawyer, I deal in evidence and consequences. James looked between us, the full reality of the situation dawning on him. The gallery, the sales, will be handled professionally, I assured him. Your artwork will still be sold. You'll still receive your contractual percentage. I have no interest in damaging your career. I'm not vindictive, just thorough. Rebecca grabbed her purse. This isn't over, Michael. Actually, it is, I replied. My firm has already filed the divorce papers this afternoon. Your things have been packed and moved to a storage facility. The access code has been sent to your email, along with the name of my colleague, who will handle all further communication. I turned to James. She's all yours now, though I suggest you read any documents she asks you to sign in the future. I stood, dropped several $100 bills on the table to cover the meal we'd never eat and the damaged glassware, and nodded to the maitre d', who looked both horrified and impressed. Enjoy the rest of your evening, I said to them both, and walked out of Canlis with the controlled stride that had earned me my reputation in courtrooms across Washington state. Outside, the Seattle rain had started, a gentle mist that matched my mood. Not triumphant, not devastated. Somewhere. In between, I had protected myself just as my father had instructed. I had utilized the details that others overlooked. I had won, by any objective measure. So why did victory feel so hollow? The next morning, I arrived at my firm to find my partners waiting in the conference room. News travels fast in Seattle's upper circles, and my public confrontation had already reached them. That was quite a performance, said Eleanor Wright, the founding partner who had hired me straight out of law school. Not how I would have handled it, but effective. The Anderson provision, mused Thomas Chen, head of the family law division. We should market it more aggressively to our high-net-worth clients. They weren't concerned about the scene I'd caused or the personal drama, only the legal strategy and its business implications. I realized that in their eyes, I had just elevated my value to the firm. The detail hunter had hunted successfully in his own life. I spent the next week burying myself in work, avoiding calls from friends and family who had heard versions of what happened. My father sent a simple text. You protected yourself. Good. No questions about how I was feeling or what came next. 10 days after the Canlis incident, I visited the gallery that now legally belonged to me. The staff eyed me nervously as I walked through the exhibition that Rebecca had curated with such care. James Wilson's sculptures still dominated the space, strange angular pieces that seemed to be reaching for something just beyond their grasp. Mara Chen, Rebecca's assistant who now reported to me, approached cautiously. Mr. Anderson, we have several pending sales to process without Rebecca's approval. Process them according to the original agreements, I instructed. Nothing changes for the artists or the clients. She seemed surprised. And the exhibition schedule for the next year? Rebecca had planned. Keep it exactly as she planned. I said, studying one of James's pieces more carefully than I ever had before. In the harsh gallery lighting, I could almost see what Rebecca had admired about his work, the tension, the implied motion, the sense of something simultaneously breaking and coming together. Will you be appointing a new director? Mara asked. Yes, I replied. You, effective immediately, with a salary increase commensurate with the position. Her surprise turned to shock. Me? But I've only been the assistant director for 2 years. I'm not. You're qualified, I interrupted. Rebecca spoke highly of your eye for new talent. The gallery needs stability now, not another disruption. As Mara processed this unexpected promotion, I handed her a business card. This is my personal attorney. He'll be contacting you about the transfer of the gallery to a new ownership structure. You're selling? I'm establishing an independent foundation that will own the gallery, I explained. With you as director and a board comprised of arts professionals, not lawyers, the gallery will remain exactly what Rebecca intended it to be, just without Rebecca. Later that evening, sitting alone in the apartment that now felt too large and too empty, I poured myself a scotch and finally allowed myself to contemplate what I'd done. I had executed the legal strategy perfectly, protected my assets, and even preserved Rebecca's professional legacy while removing her from it. The prenuptial agreement had worked exactly as designed. I had won. Yet, as I looked around at the artwork, Rebecca had chosen the furniture we had selected together, the life we had built. I recognized that my victory was Pyrrhic. I had protected myself from financial loss, but not from the pain of betrayal. The prenup had secured my assets, but couldn't shield my heart. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca, the first communication since that night at Canlis. James left for New York yesterday. Turns out he had a girlfriend there too. Congratulations on your perfect revenge. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The lawyer in me had prevailed, but at what cost to the man? 3 months later, the divorce was finalized with minimal additional drama. Rebecca didn't contest anything, perhaps recognizing the futility given the ironclad prenup. I heard through mutual friends that she had moved to Portland to start over. The gallery, now officially the Anderson Arts Foundation, was thriving under Mara's direction, with several new artists whose work was receiving national attention. On the first anniversary of the Canley confrontation, I found myself back at the restaurant, sitting alone at the bar. The maître d' recognized me immediately. "Mr. Anderson," he said discreetly, "your usual table." "Just a drink tonight," I replied. "At the bar is fine." He nodded understandingly. "Some moments don't need to be revisited." As I sipped my scotch, a woman took the seat next to mine. "That's a serious expression for a Friday night," she observed, ordering a glass of Cabernet. "Just remembering a lesson in fine print," I replied. She smiled. "I'm a contracts attorney. Fine print is my life." "Corporate law," I offered, extending my hand. "Michael Anderson." "Sophia Reyes," she said, her handshake firm. "Wait, the Michael Anderson, the Anderson provision." I winced slightly. My claim to fame, apparently. "It was brilliant," she said, surprising me. "Not the public confrontation. That was a bit dramatic for my taste, but the legal construction of the clause itself. I've used a modified version for several clients. For the first time in months, I found myself genuinely curious about another person. Modified how? Sophia took a sip of her wine. I added mutual enforcement provisions. Both parties face penalties for infidelity, not just the less wealthy spouse. Seems more equitable. "That is better," I admitted. "More balanced. The best contracts protect everyone involved, not just the person with the most power," she said, her expression thoughtful rather than judgmental. As our conversation continued, touching on legal precedents, Seattle's art scene, and eventually our shared love of hiking the Olympic Peninsula, I recognized something I hadn't felt in a long time: the simple pleasure of connecting with someone, without calculation or strategy. When Sophia eventually gathered her things to leave, she hesitated. "I'm trying a new trail tomorrow morning. Mount Si. It's supposed to be challenging but worth it for the view." "I know it well," I said. "The view is spectacular." "Would you like to join me?" she asked directly. "Fair warning, I start early." I considered her invitation, thinking about the prenup already drafted and saved on my computer at home, the updated version with more equitable terms that I'd been working on abstractly, as an intellectual exercise. The Anderson Provision 2.0, now with Sophia's suggested mutual. Enforcement. I'd like that, I said finally, but I should warn you, I have trust issues. She smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. Good, so do I. That means we'll both read everything before we sign it. As she left, I realized that perhaps the most important clause had been missing from my carefully constructed legal protections, one that allowed for growth, for learning from mistakes, for the possibility that winning might sometimes look different than expected. The next morning, as I prepared for the hike with Sophia, I deleted the draft prenup from my computer, not because I had decided to trust. Blindly, I would never be that person, but because I understood now that true protection came not just from legal documents, but from choosing the right people to build with. The details still mattered, but perhaps they weren't always found in paragraph 4 of page 17. They might instead be in the way someone asks about your day and actually listens to the answer. In the mutual respect that makes both people want to protect each other, in the shared understanding that the fine print should be read together, not as adversaries, but as partners with aligned interests. I had learned from Rebecca and our failed marriage in ways my father never could have. Taught me. The lesson wasn't just protect yourself first, it was about finding someone worth protecting, who would do the same for you in return. As I locked my apartment door behind me, I noticed one of Rebecca's smaller art pieces still hanging in the hallway, an abstract painting she had created herself, not quite my taste, but undeniably compelling. I'd keep it, I decided, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as evidence of an important case study in my ongoing education. The detail hunter was still hunting, after all, just with a slightly different brief than before. The morning after, I discovered Rebecca's messages with James. I woke up before her and silently made coffee, watching Seattle's skyline emerge from the fog through our kitchen window. The city looked different somehow. Sharper, colder, a place of angles and edges rather than the soft focus home we'd built together. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, wrapped in the silk robe I'd bought her for Christmas, hair tousled from sleep, completely unaware that everything had changed. "You're up early," she murmured, accepting the cup I handed her. Our fingers brushed, and I felt nothing. The spark that had once made such casual contact electric was gone, replaced by a hollow sensation in my chest. "Big case," I lied smoothly. "The Westbrook merger is hitting some regulatory hurdles." The lie came easily, perhaps because I'd entered a different kind of courtroom now, one where evidence was being gathered, where strategy was paramount, where winning was everything. Rebecca nodded absently, already reaching for her phone. I watched her face carefully as she scrolled through messages, noting the almost imperceptible smile that touched her lips before she schooled her expression back to neutrality. I wondered how many times I had missed that smile over the past months, how blind I had been to the signs while priding myself on my attention to detail. "I'll be late tonight," she said, not looking up from her screen. Final preparations for the Wilson exhibition. The lighting designer can only come after hours. "Of course," I replied, my voice even. "I might grab dinner with Thomas from the office then." This was our new choreography, the dance of deception. She believed she was leading, unaware, that I had begun tracking the steps, learning the rhythm of her lies. There was no Thomas from the office, no dinner plans. There would be surveillance, documentation, the methodical construction of a case that would eventually become a verdict. I kissed her goodbye as I left for work, maintaining the facade of normalcy with practiced ease. The moment our apartment door closed behind me, I pulled out my phone and made a call to Dominic Vega, a private investigator who had helped build cases for our firm's high-profile divorce clients. "I need discretion," I told him when we met, in a coffee shop far from my office. "Professional-grade surveillance, documentation of meetings, conversations if possible. Nothing that would violate Washington's two-party consent laws for recordings, but everything else." Dominic studied me with eyes that had seen countless marriages dissolve into legal proceedings. "Your own case," he stated, rather than asked. When I nodded, he didn't offer sympathy or curiosity, just professionalism. Retainer is 10,000. Results typically begin within 48 hours. I transferred the money immediately from my personal account. There's a gallery opening in 3 months. Everything needs to be ready by then. As I walked away, I felt a strange doubling of myself, the husband who had existed until yesterday and the strategist I was becoming. The husband had loved Rebecca with an intensity that surprised even me, had built dreams of a future with her, had believed in the life we were creating together. The strategist saw only the case, the evidence, the inevitable conclusion. It was the strategist who would survive this. At the office, I threw myself into work with an intensity that impressed even Eleanor Wright, the senior partner known for her unhealthy attachment to billable hours. I stayed late, came in early, took on additional cases, partly to distract myself from the unraveling of my personal life, but also to ensure that when everything came to light, my professional standing would be unimpeachable. 3 days after hiring Dominic, I received the first report in an encrypted email. Attached were photos of Rebecca and James meeting at a small cafe near her gallery, their hands entwined on the table, their posture speaking of an intimacy that twisted something inside me. There was a text log showing messages sent during times she had been sitting across from me at dinner. There was a hotel receipt from a weekend when she had supposedly been at a gallery retreat in Portland. I reviewed everything with clinical detachment, cataloguing each piece of evidence, building the case file with the same meticulous attention I gave to my biggest corporate clients. I created a secure digital vault where everything was stored, protected by layers of encryption that would make it accessible only when I needed it. A week into my investigation, Rebecca surprised me by suggesting a weekend getaway to a small bed and breakfast on Orcas Island. "We've both been so busy," she said, her hand resting on my shoulder as I pretended to review contracts at our dining table. "I miss you." I looked up into eyes I once thought I could read like legal briefs, searching for the truth behind her. Suggestion? Was it guilt? A genuine attempt to reconnect, or something more calculated? Perhaps James was unavailable that weekend. "That sounds perfect," I said, covering her hand with mine. "I'll book the ferry." The weekend unfolded like a play where both actors had secretly rewritten their scripts. We walked along rocky beaches, ate overpriced seafood at quaint restaurants, and made love in our charming room overlooking the water. I performed the role of devoted husband flawlessly, and Rebecca seemed equally committed to her performance as loving wife. Only once did the facade crack, when her phone chimed with a message during dinner, and she too quickly turned it face down on the table. "Gallery business never stops," she said with a forced laugh. "You should check it," I offered generously. "Might be important." She hesitated, then picked up the phone, angling it away from me as she read the message. Her expression shifted minutely, something between irritation and longing, before she put the phone away. "Nothing urgent." That night, while she slept beside me, I carefully extracted her phone from the charger and took it to the bathroom. The passcode hadn't changed, Matisse 1889, and the message that had interrupted our dinner was still there. "James. Missing. You this weekend. Studio feels empty without you critiquing my work. Tell the husband you're sick and come back early." I took a screenshot, emailed it to myself, and deleted all evidence of my digital trespassing before returning the phone to its place. Back in bed, I stared at the ceiling, listening to Rebecca's steady breathing and wondering if she dreamed of him. The next morning over breakfast, she mentioned that the gallery might need her to return early. "There's an issue with one of the installations," she said, stirring her coffee with unnecessary focus. "I might have to catch the afternoon ferry." "I'll come with you," I offered, watching panic briefly flash across her features. No, no, you've been looking forward to the hike on Mount Constitution. You should stay, enjoy the rest of the weekend. I'll see you back home tomorrow. I nodded agreeably, already planning to follow her. If you're sure. 6 hours later, I watched from my rental car as Rebecca met James outside her gallery. They didn't embrace on the street, too public, too risky, but their body language, as they disappeared inside, told me everything. I took photos with a telephoto lens, adding them to my growing collection of evidence. As weeks passed, my dual life became almost routine. By day, I was the rising star at Wright, Chen and Associates, handling complex corporate mergers with a precision that earned me partnership discussions despite my relatively young age. By night, I was building the case against my wife and her lover, documenting meetings, messages, hotel stays, each piece of evidence a nail in the coffin of my marriage. What surprised me most was how easily Rebecca and I continued our charade of normalcy. We still hosted dinner parties for her gallery, associates and my firm colleagues. We still discussed renovating the guest bathroom and whether to plan a trip to Japan next spring. We still moved around each other in the choreographed intimacy of long-term partners, handing off coffee mugs and sharing sections of the Sunday paper. Only now I noticed things I had missed before, how she always kept her phone with her, even taking it to the bathroom. How her gallery hours had developed a pattern, late Tuesdays and Thursdays, the same nights James's studio lights burned until past midnight, according to Dominic's surveillance. How she had begun suggesting separate social engagements, creating space for her double life. 2 months in, I moved to the next phase of my strategy. I needed to understand exactly what Rebecca and James planned after the exhibition that was now just a month away. Dominic's surveillance had confirmed regular meetings, but hadn't captured the details of their conversations. For that, I needed someone on the inside. Mara Chen had been Rebecca's assistant for 2 years, a talented young curator with ambition that exceeded her current position. I arranged to run into her at the coffee shop near the gallery, timing my arrival to coincide with her afternoon latte ritual. "Mr. Anderson," she said with surprise when I approached her table. "Rebecca's not here today. She's visiting a collector's private holdings in Bellevue." I smiled, knowing from Dominic's tracking that visiting a collector was code for meeting James at his secondary studio outside the city. "Actually, I was hoping to run into you, Mara. Do you have a moment?" Her curiosity piqued. She gestured to the empty chair across from her. I sat, placing my coffee on the table between us. "I'm considering a surprise for Rebecca after the Wilson exhibition," I began, the lie practiced and smooth, a celebration of her professional achievement, but I need someone on the inside to help me understand the gallery's plans following the opening. Mara's expression shifted subtly, discomfort flickering across her features before professionalism reasserted itself. "The gallery schedule is quite full through the end of the year," she said carefully. "Rebecca has been finalizing the rotation of exhibitions for the next 2 quarters. I leaned forward slightly. "And what about Rebecca's personal schedule? I'm thinking of planning something special, maybe a trip, but I don't want to conflict with any commitments she might have made." The discomfort returned, stronger this time. Mara fidgeted with her coffee cup, not meeting my eyes. "I don't really manage Rebecca's personal calendar." "Of course," I said smoothly. "I just thought she might have mentioned any plans, professional or personal, for after the exhibition. She's been so focused on it, I wondered what she's looking forward to next." Mara was silent for a long moment, clearly struggling with some internal conflict. Finally, she looked up, her expression resolved. "Mr. Anderson, Michael." "I think you should know that Rebecca has been making arrangements to step back from day-to-day gallery operations after the Wilson exhibition. She's been training." Me to handle more responsibilities, talking about possibly opening a satellite location. She hesitated. She mentioned possibly exploring opportunities in New York. The confirmation of my suspicions should have hurt, but instead I felt an odd sense of calm. The case was building exactly as I had anticipated. New York, I repeated thoughtfully. Has she mentioned this to the board yet? Mara shook her head. Not formally, it's all been very preliminary discussions. I see. I nodded, as if processing this surprising information for the first time. And James Wilson's work. Will the gallery continue to represent him after the exhibition? At the mention of James's name, Mara's discomfort reached its peak. I believe that's the plan, she said, then added with apparent reluctance. Mr. Wilson has mentioned relocating his studio operations to the East Coast as well, for greater exposure to the international market. I allowed a flicker of realization to cross my face, giving Mara the satisfaction of believing she had gently broken difficult news to me. That's very interesting timing, I said quietly. I shouldn't have said anything, she backpedaled, guilt washing over her features. Rebecca would be furious if she knew I was discussing gallery business with you. Your loyalty to the gallery is commendable, I assured her, reaching into my pocket and retrieving a business card. Not my standard firm card, but one connected to my private legal practice. If you ever need anything, or if there's anything else you think I should know about the gallery's future, please don't hesitate to call me directly. As I walked away, I could feel Mara's eyes on my back, her conscience weighing what she had just done. I knew she would call eventually. Her ambition and her moral compass would compel her to share any further developments. I had just planted the seed. Now I needed only to wait for it to bear fruit. That evening, Rebecca came home late as usual, bringing the scent of James's distinctive cologne with her. Not enough to be obvious, just molecules clinging to her hair and clothes from hours in his presence. She kissed me distractedly and headed for the shower. How was the collector's private collection? I called after her. She paused briefly, then continued toward the bathroom. Impressive. Some early Rothko pieces I hadn't seen before. We might be able to negotiate a loan for a future exhibition. The lie was seamless, confident. She had become skilled at this deception, perhaps even enjoying the thrill of the dual narrative she was crafting. I wondered if she sometimes confused the stories herself, if the boundaries between her truths and falsehoods had begun to blur as mine had. While she showered, I checked in with Dominic, who confirmed that Rebecca and James had spent 3 hours at his studio before she had stopped at a small jewelry boutique in Bellevue, a detail that piqued my interest. I requested photos of any purchase, adding another thread to the complex tapestry of evidence I was weaving. 3 weeks before the exhibition opening, Mara called me, her voice tight with anxiety. I need to speak with you. Not over the phone. We met at a park near Lake Union, far from both the gallery and my office. Mara handed me a flash drive before even sitting down on the bench beside me. Rebecca asked me to prepare preliminary paperwork for the sale of her ownership shares in the gallery, she said without preamble. She's planning to liquidate her position immediately after the Wilson exhibition. The documents are on that drive. I pocketed the flash drive, maintaining a calm exterior despite the significant development. Did she mention why? Mara nodded, twisting her hands in her lap. She told the board she's pursuing an opportunity to curate for a major New York gallery, but I found something else while preparing the paperwork. She hesitated, moral quandary, evident in her expression. James Wilson has incorporated a new business entity, a gallery consulting firm. Rebecca's name is on the registration as co-owner. They've already leased space in Manhattan. I see, I said quietly, the final pieces falling into place. Thank you for telling me this. I'm not doing this to betray Rebecca, Mara said, quickly. The gallery is my life too. I've worked so hard to help build its reputation. If she and James are planning to poach our artists and collectors for their new venture... She trailed off, professional concern mixing with personal. Betrayal. You're protecting your future, I assured her. There's nothing wrong with that. That night, I reviewed the documents Mara had provided. Rebecca and James had indeed formed a partnership, both romantic and professional. They had secured gallery space in Manhattan's Chelsea district, obtained financial backing from several investors, including, ironically, clients whose collections Rebecca had helped build through our gallery, and developed a business plan that essentially transplanted the most profitable aspects of the Seattle operation to New York. More damning were the emails between them discussing which artists and collectors they planned to take with them, conversations that potentially violated Rebecca's fiduciary duty to the Seattle gallery. They had carefully timed everything around the exhibition. James would receive significant exposure and sales. Rebecca would announce her departure, citing a prestigious opportunity, and within 3 months they would launch their new venture, with capital from both their professional successes and their personal assets. My personal assets, the ones protected by page 17, paragraph 4. I leaned back in my office chair, the Seattle skyline glittering beyond my window as evening settled over the city. The full scope of their plan was now clear, and with it, my response began to take shape. The exhibition opening, our anniversary dinner the following night, the confrontation that would trigger the prenuptial clause, all the elements aligned perfectly. I began making phone calls, first to Eleanor Wright, explaining in careful professional terms that I needed to discuss a potential conflict of interest involving my wife's gallery. Then to Thomas Chen, the family law specialist in our firm, requesting a discreet review of my prenuptial agreement with a focus on the infidelity provisions. Finally, to the maitre d' at Canlis, making specific arrangements for our anniversary dinner that would become the stage for the final act. Mr. Anderson, Eleanor said when we met in her office the next morning, I've reviewed the situation you described, and I agree that your firm should handle this matter personally rather than referring you to outside counsel. The prenuptial agreement you drafted is essentially a test case for provisions we've since recommended to numerous clients. Its successful enforcement would set a beneficial precedent. I appreciate your support, I replied, maintaining the professional demeanor that had become my armor. I want to be clear that my intent is not punitive. I simply want to protect what's legally mine while allowing Rebecca to pursue her new direction. Eleanor's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched slightly. The Anderson provision is inherently punitive, Michael. That was its design, to create consequences significant enough to deter infidelity or compensate for its damage. If you're having second thoughts... No second thoughts, I interrupted, just ensuring that the enforcement serves its intended purpose without unnecessary cruelty. The law isn't concerned with cruelty, Eleanor reminded me, her voice carrying the weight of 30 years in legal practice, only with justice as defined by the agreements freely entered into by both parties. Rebecca signed the prenuptial with legal counsel present. She chose not to read it thoroughly. That's not your responsibility. I nodded, knowing she was right from a legal perspective, yet something in me still hesitated at the threshold of what I was about to do, not because I doubted the justice of it, but because I recognized that justice and healing were not the same thing. The prenup would secure my financial future and professional standing, but it wouldn't restore what had been broken. Later that day, I received photos from Dominic showing Rebecca leaving the jewelry store in Bellevue with a small bag. Subsequent surveillance captured her meeting James at his studio and presenting him with a watch, an expensive timepiece based on the box design visible in the photos. A gift, perhaps, to celebrate their upcoming new beginning. The irony that she had purchased it with funds that would soon be forfeit under the prenuptial agreement was not lost on me. As the exhibition opening approached, Rebecca became increasingly absent from our shared life, often returning home after I had gone to bed and leaving before I woke. We existed in parallel dimensions that occasionally intersected for brief, performative moments of couplehood. A quick dinner where conversation remained superficial. A social event where we played our roles with practiced ease. Morning coffee, where we discussed inconsequential matters while avoiding each other's eyes. I found myself studying her during these moments, searching for traces of the woman I had fallen in love with. Sometimes I caught glimpses in the way she still absently tucked her hair behind her ear when concentrating, or how her eyes lit up when discussing an artist she admired. But these fragments only emphasized how completely the rest of her had become a stranger to me. The night before the exhibition opening, Rebecca surprised me by suggesting we have dinner at home together. "I've been so busy with the preparations," she said, an understatement that hung between us like a physical presence. "But I wanted us to have some time before tomorrow's craziness begins." I agreed, curious about this unexpected gesture. Was it guilt, a final moment of nostalgia before she detonated our marriage? Or something more calculating, perhaps ensuring that I would attend the opening without suspicion? She cooked pasta and primavera, a dish from early in our relationship, when we were too poor to eat out often and had made romantic adventures of creating meals in her tiny apartment kitchen. The familiarity of it struck an unexpected chord of sadness within me. "Remember that first apartment?" she asked, seeming to follow my thoughts as she poured wine for both of us. "With the leaky faucet, and the neighbor who practiced saxophone at midnight, and the view of the brick wall that you insisted on calling urban texture," I added, allowing myself to be drawn into the reminiscence despite my better judgment. She laughed, the sound genuine in a way little between us had been recently. "I was so determined to find beauty in everything back then." "You were good at it," I acknowledged, seeing potential where others saw only flaws. Something shifted in her expression, a flicker of the Rebecca I had known, vulnerable and uncertain rather than calculating. "Michael, she began, then stopped herself, retreating behind the mask once more. "I hope you'll be proud of the exhibition tomorrow. It represents some of my best work as a curator." I raised my glass in a toast. "To your success," I said simply. She clinked her glass against mine, her eyes not quite meeting my gaze. "To success," she echoed. We finished dinner with conversation that carefully avoided anything meaningful, and I found myself wondering what she might have said if she hadn't stopped herself. Would she have confessed, apologized, or simply offered some platitude about growing apart that would give her moral cover for her actions? I would never know. We had both chosen our paths now, hers with James, toward their new venture in New York, mine toward the confrontation that would enforce the consequences laid out in page 17, paragraph 4. The invisible machinery of our separate plans was already in motion, gears turning toward an inevitable collision that would permanently alter the landscape of both our lives. As Rebecca slept beside me that night, the last night we would share a bed as husband and wife, though she didn't know it yet, I stared at the ceiling and felt the strange doubling of myself again. The husband mourned what we had once been, the possibilities we had squandered, the future we would never share. The strategist reviewed the evidence, the legal provisions, the carefully orchestrated events that would unfold over the next 2 days. By morning, the strategist had fully taken control. I kissed Rebecca goodbye as she rushed off to the gallery for final exhibition preparations, my lips brushing her cheek with practiced affection that meant nothing. Then I opened my laptop and sent a series of carefully timed emails to the divorce attorney who would file the papers the following afternoon, to the storage company that would pack and move Rebecca's belongings while we were at the anniversary dinner, to Dominic with final payment for his services, and to James Wilson, an apparently innocuous message congratulating him on his exhibition and mentioning our anniversary dinner at Canlis the following evening. The trap was set. Rebecca and James had constructed an elaborate plan to dismantle our life together for their benefit. Now my own counterplan would ensure that they would have each other but little else when the dust settled. The Anderson provision would see to that, with its carefully crafted clauses and substantial penalties. The detail hunter had missed the signs of his wife's infidelity for months, but in the end, the details would be his salvation and her downfall. That evening, I stood in our bedroom adjusting my tie for the exhibition opening. The prenuptial agreement secured in my briefcase along with printed copies of the most damning evidence. In less than 24 hours, everything would change. Rebecca's carefully constructed plans would collapse, her professional reputation would be compromised, and her financial security would evaporate, all because she hadn't read the fine print of the document she had so casually signed 5 years earlier. As I straightened my collar in the mirror, I caught sight of a photo on our dresser. Rebecca and me on our wedding day, laughing as we fed each other cake, her face turned up to mine with a joy that had seemed genuine at the time. I turned, the frame face down, a small but deliberate gesture marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The Anderson provision was about to be tested, and I was ready. The gallery was transformed for the opening night of James Wilson's exhibition. Industrial pendant lights cast dramatic shadows across his angular sculptures, while the white walls showcased his large-scale paintings to maximum effect. Rebecca had spared no expense. Custom pedestals, specialty lighting, even temperature controls for the more delicate pieces. As I moved through the crowded space, champagne flute in hand, I couldn't help but admire her curatorial vision. Whatever else she might be, Rebecca Taylor Anderson was brilliant at her job. I spotted her across the room, resplendent in a deep emerald dress that complemented her red hair. She was speaking animatedly with a group of collectors, her hands gesturing to emphasize some point about James's work. The diamonds at her wrists, a gift from our second anniversary, caught the light as she moved. The irony wasn't lost on me. Soon those diamonds would be returned to the vault at our bank, another asset to be redistributed according to the prenuptial agreement she had signed but never read. James kept his distance from Rebecca, playing the role of the artist who barely knew the gallery director. He circulated among the guests in a carefully distressed black sweater that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, accepting compliments with practiced humility. Occasionally, his eyes would find Rebecca across the room, a brief glance laden with meaning, before returning to whatever conversation he was engaged in. If I hadn't been watching for it, I might have missed these subtle exchanges. But I had become an expert in their silent language, the constellation of small gestures that formed the map of their affair. "Quite a triumph for your wife," said a voice at my elbow. I turned to find Eleanor Wright, senior partner at my firm, surveying the room with the appraising eye she usually reserved for assessing opposing counsel. "The exhibition is already being called the cultural event of the season." "Rebecca has always had exceptional taste," I replied, a statement that was both compliment and indictment. She had chosen James, after all. Eleanor's gaze shifted to where James stood, explaining one of his sculptures to an elderly couple who looked more confused than enlightened. "And the artist? Is he as talented as everyone claims?" I considered the question, separating my personal feelings from my aesthetic judgment. "His work is impressive. Whether it justifies the prices is another matter." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "The same could be said of many things, including some of our legal colleagues." She took a sip of her champagne, then added in a lower voice, "Thomas has the papers ready for tomorrow. Everything is in order." I nodded slightly, acknowledging her meaning without drawing attention. "I appreciate the firm's discretion in this matter. We protect our own Michael," she said simply. Then with a sharp smile, "Besides, the Anderson provision deserves its day in court, so to speak. It's an elegant piece of legal craftsmanship." I was saved from responding by the arrival of Rebecca, her professional smile fixed firmly in place. "Eleanor, I'm so glad you could make it. What do you think of the exhibition?" As the two women exchanged pleasantries, I watched Rebecca's performance with new clarity. How many times had she done this, moved seamlessly between her role as my wife and her secret life with James? The ease with which she navigated these contradictions was almost admirable, a kind of emotional dexterity I had never possessed. "Your husband was just telling me what a triumph the exhibition is," Eleanor said, her eyes sharp with the knowledge of what would happen tomorrow. "You must be very proud." "It's been a labor of love," Rebecca replied, slipping her arm through mine in a gesture of unity that felt like a mockery. "Michael has been incredibly supportive throughout the process." The irony of her statement hung in the air between us, perceptible only to Eleanor and me. I played my part, squeezing Rebecca's hand affectionately. "You've earned every bit of praise tonight." A flash of something, guilt, uncertainty, crossed Rebecca's face before her professional mask slipped back into place. "I should continue making the rounds. Eleanor, please enjoy the exhibition. Michael, don't forget we have the interview with Seattle Arts Monthly in 10 minutes. As she moved away, Eleanor gave me a look of grudging respect. "Remarkable composure, counselor. If I didn't know better, I'd think you were the one with something to hide." The evening continued according to Rebecca's carefully orchestrated plan. I gave the appropriate supportive husband responses during the joint interview, praising my wife's vision and dedication without a hint of the knowledge that coiled inside me like a serpent. I made conversation with collectors and critics, accepting congratulations for Rebecca's success as if it were somehow mine to claim. I even exchanged cordial words with James when our paths inevitably crossed, complimenting a particularly striking sculpture that dominated the gallery's main space. "You've captured something essential there," I told him, studying the twisted metal form that seemed simultaneously to be breaking apart and coming together, the tension between stability and dissolution. James appeared momentarily caught, off guard by my genuine engagement with his work. "That's exactly what I was exploring," he said, his artist's ego overriding his discomfort at speaking with the husband of his lover. "The piece is called Fracture Points." "Aptly named," I observed, allowing a double meaning that went undetected. I imagine it was challenging to find the balance, knowing exactly where the breaking points are without allowing the entire structure to collapse. He nodded, warming to the subject. "The strength is in the connections, how the separate elements support each other even as they pull apart. A delicate equilibrium," I agreed. "One wrong move and everything falls apart." Something in my tone must have registered, because James's expression shifted slightly, uncertainty creeping in at the edges. But before he could respond, a wealthy collector interrupted to discuss a potential purchase, and the moment passed. Later, as the crowd began to thin, I found Rebecca in her office at the back of the gallery, reviewing sales figures with Mara. The exhibition had been a financial success as well as a critical one, with over half the pieces sold at prices well above their initial valuations. "We've already exceeded projections by 30%, Mara was saying, her excitement tempered by the knowledge of Rebecca's planned departure. Rebecca looked up as I entered, her smile genuine for perhaps the first time that evening. Success always brought out her best self, the passion and drive that had attracted me to her initially. "Michael, we've sold 14 pieces already. James is ecstatic. "Congratulations," I said, meaning it despite everything. "Your hard work paid off." Mara excused herself, shooting me a meaningful glance as she left us alone. Rebecca closed the sales ledger and leaned back in her chair, exhaustion finally showing through her polished exterior. "Are you happy with how it went?" I asked, perching on the edge of her desk. "Beyond happy," she admitted. "This exhibition will put the gallery on the national map." Left unspoken was what she really meant, that this success would launch her new venture with James in New York. "You deserve it," I said quietly. "No one works harder than you do." Something in my tone made her look up sharply, searching my face. For a moment, I wondered if she could see through my facade, if she sensed the reckoning that awaited her. But self-deception is a powerful force, and Rebecca had become skilled at seeing only what she wanted to see. "About tomorrow night," she said, changing the subject. "Our anniversary dinner at Canlis. I might need to stop by the gallery first to finalize some sales transactions with out-of-town collectors." "That's fine," I replied, already knowing that her sales transactions would actually be a meeting with James to celebrate their success and finalize their plans. "I've made the reservation for 8. Take all the time you need." As we drove home in separate cars, Rebecca claiming she needed to return later to oversee the cleanup, I felt an unexpected sadness wash over me. There had been real love between us once, genuine connection that had somehow corroded into this hollow performance. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation, the legal consequences, the public unraveling of our marriage. But tonight, I allowed myself to mourn what we had lost long before I discovered her betrayal. Back at our apartment, I poured myself a scotch and stood at the window overlooking the city. Seattle sparkled below, lights reflecting on the wet streets after an evening shower. Somewhere out there, Rebecca and James were together, likely celebrating their triumph, making plans for their future, unaware that in less than 24 hours those plans would collapse like one of James's sculptures with its connection point severed. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas Chen. "Documents filed and ready. Proceedings can begin, as scheduled tomorrow afternoon." I sent a brief acknowledgement, then opened the safe hidden in my home office. Inside was the original prenuptial agreement, signed and notarized 5 years ago. I removed it carefully, turning to page 17, where paragraph 4 detailed the infidelity provisions in precise legal language. The clause had been my insurance policy, a protection against a pain I had witnessed in my father's eyes years ago. I never thought I would need to enforce it. The next morning I woke alone, Rebecca having never returned home. This, too, was more part of my evidence. Another night spent with James, documented by Dominic's surveillance. I dressed methodically in my best suit, the one I reserved for high-stakes courtroom appearances. Today would be a different kind of trial, with Canlis Restaurant as the venue and our anniversary dinner as the setting for both prosecution and judgment. I spent the morning at the office, finalizing details for what would follow the confrontation. By noon, the divorce papers had been filed with the court. By 2, a storage company had been scheduled to pack Rebecca's personal belongings while we were at dinner. By 4, the locks on our apartment would be changed, and access to our joint accounts frozen pending resolution of the divorce proceedings. The most difficult call came mid-afternoon, to my mother, explaining in careful terms that my marriage was ending and why. She listened without interruption, then sighed deeply. "I'm so sorry, Michael," she said, her voice heavy with the memory of her own failed marriage to my father. "Are you certain this is how you want to handle it, and publicly?" "The public aspect is necessary for the prenuptial provisions to take full effect," I explained, the lawyer in me speaking rather than the husband. "The reputational damage clause specifically requires—" "I'm not asking about the legal strategy," she interrupted gently. I'm asking if this is what you need for your own peace. Will this heal you or just punish her? The question caught me off guard, breaking through the calculated facade I had maintained for months. I don't know, I admitted, my voice suddenly less certain. But it's too late to change course now. It's never too late until it's done, she said. Just make sure you're choosing justice, not vengeance. They look similar, but they lead to very different places. Her words stayed with me as I drove to Canlis that evening, the first seeds of doubt taking root beneath my carefully constructed certainty. Was I pursuing justice or vengeance? Did the distinction even matter when the outcome would be the same? Rebecca had made her choices, calculated her moves, planned her exit. My response was simply the consequence of those choices, the enforcement of an agreement she had willingly, if carelessly, signed. Canlis gleamed like a jewel box on the hillside overlooking Lake Union, its mid-century architecture housing one of Seattle's most prestigious dining experiences. I arrived early, confirming the arrangements with the maître d', the specific table with its view of the entrance, the champagne to be served immediately, the staff's awareness that a situation might develop. "We'll handle everything with discretion, Mr. Anderson," he assured me, professional concern evident in his manner, though I must emphasize our commitment to all our guests' comfort. "There won't be a scene," I promised, though we both knew that scenes at Canlis were defined differently than elsewhere. Even raised voices would constitute a disruption in the restaurant's rarefied atmosphere. Just an unexpected guest. I was seated at exactly 7:45, the table positioned perfectly according to my specifications. The champagne arrived, Dom Perignon, 2008, Rebecca's favorite. I ordered for both of us, selecting dishes I knew she preferred. Every detail was considered, every element arranged to create the precise conditions necessary for paragraph 4 to take effect. At 8:15, Rebecca arrived, looking stunning in a black dress I had never seen before. New, I presumed, purchased for this evening, or perhaps for her new life in New York. Her hair was swept up, revealing the diamond earrings that had been my gift on our first anniversary, another irony to add to the evening's collection. "Sorry I'm late," she said, kissing my cheek before sitting down. Her perfume was different too. Something lighter, more contemporary than her usual scent. Another change in preparation for her transformation from Rebecca Anderson to whoever she planned to become with James. The collectors had endless questions. "It's our anniversary," I replied, pouring her champagne. "Nothing else matters tonight." We fell into conversation about the exhibition's success, about a possible trip to Italy we both knew would never happen, about mutual friends whose connections to us would soon be severed by the divide of divorce. The performance continued, both of us playing our roles with the skill of veteran actors, while the clock ticked inexorably toward the moment when the charade would end. At precisely 8:43, James Wilson entered Canlis, ushered directly to our table, by the maître d' as I had arranged. He carried a small gift bag, jewelry, I would later learn, bought with profits from the exhibition sales. His face registered confusion when he saw me, then alarm as he realized the situation. "James!" Rebecca's voice held genuine shock. "What are you doing here?" "You asked me to meet you for a celebratory drink about the exhibition." His confusion was real. The text message that had summoned him had come from Rebecca's phone, though I had been the one to send it earlier that day while she was in the shower. I stood, extending my hand with perfect courtesy. "James Wilson, I've heard so much about you. Please join us. We're celebrating our 5th anniversary." The confrontation unfolded exactly as I had choreographed. Rebecca's champagne glass shattered on the floor. James tried to retreat, but was drawn into the conversation by my calm insistence. I produced the prenuptial agreement, directing his Attention to page 17, paragraph 4, with its devastating consequences. The restaurant fell silent as the drama played out, providing the witnesses necessary for the reputational damage clause to take effect. "This is insane," James said, staring at the document with growing comprehension. "Rebecca, you told me your husband was just a silent investor in the gallery. You said after the exhibition. After the exhibition, you were going to both disappear with the proceeds from his newly inflated art prices. I finished for him. A clever plan, except for page 17, paragraph 4. What I hadn't anticipated was the champagne glass that came flying past my head, exploding against the wall in a spray of crystal and expensive wine. Rebecca stood, fury transforming her features into something barely recognizable. "You planned this," she hissed, gathering her purse. "You manipulated this entire situation." I straightened my tie, maintaining the composure that had become my shield. I simply created circumstances where the truth would reveal itself. As a lawyer, I deal in evidence and consequences. The rest proceeded according to plan. My revelation that the divorce papers had already been filed, that Rebecca's belongings had been moved to storage, that the gallery ownership would revert to me under the prenuptial provisions. James's stunned realization that their carefully constructed future had imploded. Rebecca's final words of defiance before she stormed out, James following in her wake like debris caught in a hurricane. I paid the bill, leaving a substantial tip for the staff who had witnessed the uncomfortable scene and walked out into the Seattle evening. Rain had begun to fall, a gentle mist that seemed fitting for the moment. I had achieved exactly what I set out to do, triggered the prenuptial provisions, secured my financial interests, exposed the affair in a way that activated the reputational damage clause. By any objective measure, I had won. But as I stood on the sidewalk outside Canlis, watching Rebecca and James argue in the parking lot before driving away in separate cars, my mother's question echoed in my mind. Was this justice or vengeance? And would either one heal the wound left by betrayal? I had no answer as I drove back to the apartment that was now legally mine alone. The locks had been changed as scheduled. The new key waited in an envelope with the doorman. Inside, the space felt cavernous, Rebecca's absence palpable in the small gaps where her personal items had been removed. The art remained, technically mine under the prenuptial agreement, though I had instructed the movers to leave anything with sentimental value for her to claim later. On the kitchen counter, I found her keys and wedding ring, placed deliberately, where I would see them immediately. No note accompanied them. None was needed. The symbolism was clear enough. I poured myself a scotch and carried it to the window where I had stood the night before, contemplating the confrontation to come. Now, with the moment behind me, I found myself strangely empty. I had preserved my assets, enforced the contract, achieved the legal victory, but these accomplishments felt hollow. Technical successes that addressed the financial betrayal, but not the emotional one. My phone buzzed relentlessly with messages from those who had witnessed the scene or heard about it afterward. Eleanor congratulating me on the successful execution of the Anderson provision. Thomas confirming that Rebecca's attorneys had received the divorce papers. Friends expressing shock or offering support. I ignored them all, retreating into silence as the rain intensified outside, streaking the windows with rivulets that mimicked tears. Near midnight, a final text arrived from Rebecca herself. You got what you wanted. The legal victory, the public humiliation. I hope it was worth the price. I started to type several responses before deleting them all. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like justification or worse, regret. The case had been presented, the judgment rendered, the consequences enforced. The legal proceedings that would follow were merely formalities to document what had already been decided by paragraph 4. Sleep eluded me that night. I roamed the apartment like a ghost, seeing memories in every corner. Rebecca painting, the accent wall in the dining room, insisting that the deep blue would make dinner conversations more intimate. Rebecca arranging flowers in the vase her mother had given us, humming softly to herself as she worked. Rebecca asleep on the sofa, a gallery catalogue fallen open across her chest, exhausted from preparing an exhibition. Had all of it been a performance, or had there been real connection that somehow withered without my noticing? The betrayal was real, the affair documented in meticulous detail, but somewhere beneath the evidence was a more complex truth about our marriage that couldn't be captured in legal clauses or surveillance photos. Morning found me at my desk in the Home Office, reviewing the aftermath with the clinical detachment that had carried me through the past months. The Anderson provision had performed exactly as designed, triggering the financial penalties and ownership transfers specified in the prenuptial agreement. Rebecca would retain her personal property and a small percentage of our joint assets, but the gallery, her professional passion and the platform for her success, now belonged to me. What to do with this unexpected acquisition became my focus, a practical problem to solve rather than an emotional wound to examine. The gallery was a viable business, with a reputation enhanced by the recent exhibition's success. I had no interest in art beyond what Rebecca had cultivated in me, but I understood the financial aspects of the operation. By noon, I had scheduled meetings with the gallery's board and staff for the following day. By evening, I had reviewed the financial statements and legal structure of the business. The work provided welcome distraction from the questions that lingered on the edges of my consciousness. Questions about justice and vengeance, about winning and losing, about what remained when the legal battle was won, but the emotional landscape was scorched earth. 3 days after the canless confrontation, I entered the gallery for the first time as its owner. James Wilson's exhibition was still on display, his sculptures standing like sentinels in the space that Rebecca had designed with such care. The staff watched me nervously as I toured the facility, uncertain of my intentions now that I controlled their professional futures. Mara approached cautiously, her loyalty to Rebecca now complicated by her new reporting relationship to me. "Mr. Anderson, the staff is understandably concerned about what happens next. Will you be selling the gallery?" The question crystallized something I had been considering since reviewing the business operations. "No," I said with sudden certainty. "I won't be selling, but I will be making changes to the ownership structure." Over the next week, I worked with lawyers to establish the Anderson Arts Foundation, an independent entity that would own and operate the gallery. I appointed Mara as director, recognizing both her talent and her ambition. I created a board comprised of arts professionals who would guide the gallery's artistic direction while I maintained financial oversight. "You're essentially giving away control of a valuable asset," Thomas observed when I presented the structure to him for legal review. "The foundation model means you won't directly profit from the gallery's success." "The gallery was never about profit for me," I explained. "It was Rebecca's passion, her creation. I want it to continue as she envisioned it, just without her at the helm." Thomas studied me with the perceptive gaze that made him such an effective family law attorney. "That's an unusually generous approach to an asset acquired through an infidelity clause." I considered his observation, trying to articulate the complex mixture of motives behind my decision. "Perhaps the Anderson provision achieved its purpose in protecting my financial interests," I said finally. "But destroying Rebecca's professional legacy won't heal what was broken between us." The foundation structure accomplished what I hadn't initially recognized I wanted, a resolution that honored the creative work Rebecca had done while removing her from its future direction. It was, I realized, a more nuanced form of justice, Then the stark terms of paragraph 4, a recognition that even in betrayal, there were aspects worth preserving. 2 weeks after establishing the foundation, I received an email from James Wilson. The subject line was simply, "Thank you," which was surprising enough to make me open it immediately. "Mr. Anderson," he wrote, "I want to express my gratitude for your decision regarding my exhibition. You had every right to remove my work from the gallery given the circumstances, but you allowed the show to continue as planned. The sales have established my career in ways I couldn't have imagined. I recognize the complexity of this situation and appreciate the professionalism you've shown despite the personal pain I helped cause. Sincerely, James Wilson." The email was unexpected, an acknowledgement of harm done and grace received. I wrote a brief reply. "The work stands on its own merits, regardless of personal circumstances. I wish you success in your future endeavors." What I didn't mention was that I had begun to understand one of James's sculptures that had remained unsold, the piece called Fracture Points that had caught my attention during the opening. Its twisted form, with its precarious balance between cohesion and collapse, seemed now like a perfect metaphor for what had happened between Rebecca and me. Perhaps that understanding was the beginning of healing, a recognition that even broken, things could contain beauty and meaning. The legal proceedings continued their inexorable course toward divorce. Rebecca's attorneys made token challenges to the prenuptial provisions, but found them legally sound. The Anderson provision established a precedent that my firm began recommending to other clients. My personal pain transformed into professional innovation. Yet as the legal victory solidified, I found myself increasingly drawn to questions that had no legal answers. What had I truly won? What had been irretrievably lost? And what would remain when the legal documents were signed and filed away? 3 months after the Canlis confrontation, I sat in my office reviewing the quarterly financial reports for the Anderson Arts Foundation. Under Mara's direction, the gallery had not only maintained its momentum, but expanded its influence in Seattle's art scene. The foundation model had attracted donors eager to support a non-profit cultural institution, and several artists who had been considering leaving after Rebecca's departure had decided to stay, impressed by the gallery's new, mission-focused approach. "These numbers are remarkable," I said to Mara during our monthly review meeting, "especially considering the transition." She nodded, professional pride evident in her posture. At 28, she was young for a gallery director, but her instincts for both art and business had proven exceptional. "We've actually increased foot traffic by 30% since implementing the community outreach programs." The educational initiative for public schools was particularly inspired, I acknowledged. "That was Rebecca's idea originally," Mara said carefully, watching my reaction. "I just implemented it." It was the first time Rebecca's name had been mentioned directly in these meetings. Usually, we spoke around her absence, referring to the previous director or earlier plans. I appreciated Mara's honesty, her willingness to acknowledge Rebecca's contributions rather than erasing them to curry favor with me. "She always had a gift for seeing potential connections," I said after a moment, surprising myself with the evenness of my tone. Mara seemed to take my response as permission to broach the subject further. "She's in Portland now, started working with a smaller gallery there, focusing on emerging artists." I nodded, having already learned this from the divorce proceedings. Rebecca had moved quickly after the confrontation, establishing a new life that deliberately avoided the high-profile career path she and James had planned in New York. Whether this was a strategic retreat or a genuine re-evaluation of priorities remained unclear. "And James Wilson?" I asked, curious despite myself. "New York as planned," Mara replied. "Though without Rebecca, His career is taking off. The exposure from our exhibition created significant demand. But, she hesitated, but what? The new work isn't as good, she said with a curator's blunt assessment. Technical skill, certainly, but missing the emotional depth of the pieces Rebecca helped develop. Critics have noticed. This information shouldn't have given me satisfaction, yet some petty part of me was gratified to learn that James's artistic success had been at least partly dependent on Rebecca's influence, an influence now withdrawn. Perhaps they had each lost something valuable in the aftermath of our marriage's dissolution. After Mara left, I remained at my desk, contemplating the strange path that had led me to become the steward of Rebecca's professional legacy, even as our personal connection had been severed. The legal victory had been absolute. The Anderson provision had functioned exactly as designed, protecting my financial interests and creating significant consequences for Rebecca's infidelity. Yet increasingly I found myself questioning what had truly been won. The divorce had been finalized a month earlier, the dissolution of our 5-year marriage reduced to signatures on legal documents and a brief appearance before a judge. Rebecca had appeared thin and subdued in the courtroom, nothing like the vibrant force of nature I had married. She had not contested any of the prenuptial provisions, accepting the financial penalties without argument. Our only direct interaction had been a brief conversation outside the courthouse after the proceedings concluded. "Was it worth it?" she had asked, her voice holding neither anger nor sorrow, just a weary curiosity. The public humiliation, destroying the gallery career I spent a decade building? You were planning to abandon the gallery anyway, I pointed out, for your venture with James in New York. That's not an answer to my question. Her gaze had held mine steadily. Did enforcing the prenup heal anything for you, Michael? I had no ready response, the practiced justifications suddenly inadequate in the face of her direct inquiry. Before I could formulate an answer, her Uber had arrived, and she left without another word, disappearing into the Seattle rain that had become the backdrop for the key moments of our unraveling. Her question lingered, demanding an honesty I had avoided since discovering her affair. The Anderson provision had protected my assets, established a legal precedent, even enhanced my professional reputation. But had it addressed the real injury of betrayal? Had the public confrontation at Canlis restored anything that had been broken within me? The intercom on my desk buzzed, interrupting my reflections. "Mr. Anderson, there's a Sophia Reyes here to see you about the Carroll acquisition. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's time-sensitive." I didn't recognize the name, but the Carroll acquisition was a significant corporate merger my firm was handling. "Send her in." The woman who entered my office was not what I expected. Most corporate attorneys I encountered wore the uniform of our profession. Conservative suits in navy or charcoal, minimal accessories, an overall aesthetic that projected reliable competence rather than individual style. Sophia Reyes had clearly missed that memo. She wore a perfectly tailored burgundy suit with subtle gold pinstripes, her dark hair cut in a precise bob that framed intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. No wedding ring, I noticed automatically, then questioned why I had looked for one. "Mr. Anderson," she said, extending her hand. Her handshake was firm, confident. "I apologize for the unscheduled intrusion. I'm representing Meridian Partners in the Carroll acquisition and just received information that significantly impacts the timeline." I gestured for her to sit. I wasn't aware Meridian had brought in outside counsel. "As of yesterday," she replied, removing documents from her leather portfolio. "The regulatory concerns raised in your latest filing prompted them to seek specialized expertise in securities compliance." There was no arrogance in her statement, just a straightforward assessment of her role. For the next 40 minutes, we discussed the acquisition's regulatory challenges, finding unexpected common ground in our approach to complex legal problems. Sophia Reyes was thorough, incisive, and refreshingly direct, qualities I valued in any attorney, but rarely found combined with such evident passion for the work itself. "You enjoy securities law," I observed as our discussion concluded. She smiled, the expression transforming her professional demeanor into something more approachable. "I find elegant solutions in regulatory frameworks that most people consider impenetrable. There's a certain satisfaction in navigating complexity." "The detail hunter," I said without thinking. "Excuse me?" "Nothing," I said quickly. "Just an old nickname from law school." A lie, but easier than explaining the persona I had cultivated. At my firm, the meticulous attention to detail that had once made me successful in my career and catastrophically blind in my marriage. Sophia gathered her materials, our business concluded. At the door, she paused. "I'm normally much more professional about appointments, Mr. Anderson. Thank you for accommodating the interruption." "Michael," I corrected automatically, and it was a productive interruption. After she left, I found myself thinking about her approach to the legal questions we'd discussed, not just the technical analysis, which had been impressive, but the underlying philosophy she brought to her work. Where I saw legal provisions as protections against worst-case scenarios, she viewed them as frameworks for equitable relationships. The contrast was subtle but significant, particularly in light of how I had crafted and enforced the Anderson provision. That evening I met my father for dinner at his club, a monthly tradition that had survived my divorce, largely because we both tacitly agreed not to discuss it in depth. David Anderson had remarried 15 years earlier to Catherine, a kind woman who had gradually softened his harder edges. His medical practice had thrived, and he had recently begun a phased retirement that seemed to agree with him. The bitterness that had defined him after my mother's affairs had gradually faded, replaced by a cautious contentment I sometimes envied. "The Anderson Arts Foundation has taken an interesting direction," he commented as we waited for our entrees. "Catherine attended the new exhibition opening last week. She was impressed by the community focus." I nodded, pleased that my father had noticed the gallery's evolution. "Mara Chen has a vision for making art more accessible without compromising quality." "Not unlike your mother's approach to education," he observed. The comparison surprised me. My father rarely referenced my mother except in the context of their failed marriage. She always believed that excellence and inclusivity weren't opposing forces. "I didn't realize you saw it that way," I said carefully. He shrugged, swirling the scotch in his glass. "Time offers perspective, even on painful subjects." You studied me for a moment before adding, "How are you really doing, Michael, beyond the professional successes?" The question caught me off guard. Our relationship had always centered on achievement and strategy rather than emotional well-being. "I'm adjusting," I said finally. "The legal aspects are resolved. The rest is more complicated." "The legal aspects are always the easiest," my father said with the wisdom of experience. "It's the questions that remain afterward that haunt you." "Like what?" "Like whether protecting yourself from pain also protected you from healing," he said quietly. Something I realized far too late. His unexpected insight silenced me. My father had been the one who taught me to create legal safeguards against emotional vulnerabilities. His words, after my mother's betrayal, had shaped my approach to relationships, culminating in the prenuptial agreement that had both protected and isolated me. I thought the Anderson provision would provide clean closure, I admitted, a clear consequence for a clear transgression. And did it? I considered the question with the honesty it deserved. It provided legal closure, financial resolution, professional consequences. But emotionally, I trailed off, searching for the right words. Emotionally, it's messier, my father finished for me. Betrayal always is. How did you move past it? I asked, the question I had never voiced during all the years of watching him rebuild his life after my mother left. He was silent for a long moment. I didn't, for many years. I focused on the legal victory, on maintaining my practice, on raising you with my values intact. I built walls against further hurt and called it strength. He looked at me directly. It wasn't until I met Catherine that I realized what those walls had cost me. And now? Now I understand that your mother's choices reflected her own struggles, not my worth. That forgiving her wasn't about excusing what she did, but about freeing myself from being defined by it. He smiled slightly. Easier said at 65 than it would have been at 40, I admit. As we finished dinner, discussing safer topics of medical advances and legal precedents, I found myself returning to his words about walls and their costs. The Anderson provision had been my wall, theoretically protecting me from harm while actually isolating me from the vulnerability necessary for genuine connection. Walking back to my apartment through Seattle's autumn evening, I passed couples sharing umbrellas against the light rain, their casual intimacy a reminder of what had been lost in the methodical dismantling of my marriage. Not just the relationship with Rebecca, which had clearly been compromised long before I discovered her affair, but the capacity for trust that made such intimacy possible. 2 days later, I found myself back at Canley's for the first time since the confrontation that had triggered the Anderson provision. I hadn't planned to return to the scene, but a client had suggested the location for a celebration dinner after closing a particularly complex acquisition, and refusing would have required an explanation I wasn't prepared to give. The maître d' recognized me immediately, a flicker of recollection crossing his professional expression before he smoothly led our party to a table far from the one where my marriage had publicly imploded. The client, unaware of the history, ordered champagne to celebrate our success, and I found myself sipping from a flute identical to the one Rebecca had shattered against the wall. Midway through dinner, I excused myself and walked to the bar, needing a moment alone to process the unexpected emotions triggered by returning to this space. The restaurant looked different from this vantage point. Still elegant, still exclusive, but somehow smaller than it had loomed in my memory of that night. "That's a serious expression for a Friday night," said a voice beside me. I turned to find Sophia Reyes taking the adjacent bar stool, her presence as unexpected as my reaction to it. "Occupational hazard of corporate law," I replied, surprised, into honesty. "Always looking for the potential problems lurking behind the celebration." She smiled, ordering a Cabernet. "The detail hunter at work, I presume?" I startled at her use of the nickname. "How did you—" "Due diligence," she said simply. "After our meeting about the Carroll acquisition, I researched the attorney I'd be working with. Your reputation at Wright, Chen and Associates is quite specific. And now you've caught me taking a strategic retreat from my own client dinner." "Strategic retreats can be necessary," she observed, her tone free of judgment, "especially when a location carries associations." Her careful choice of words made me look at her more closely. "You know about what happened here?" She nodded. "The Anderson provision has become something of a legend in family law circles. Its application in a public setting was particularly noted." I felt a flash of discomfort at the realization that my personal drama had become professional case study. "Not my finest moment," I admitted. "I disagree," she said, surprising me. "Not about the public confrontation. That was rather dramatically staged. But the legal construction of the clause itself was elegant. I've adapted versions of it for several clients." "Adapted how?" I found myself genuinely curious. added mutual enforcement provisions, she explained. Both parties face penalties for infidelity, not just the financially advantaged spouse. Makes it feel less like a trap and more like a mutual commitment to fidelity. Her modification struck me as obvious in retrospect. A balanced approach that maintained the protective function while acknowledging the relationship's reciprocal nature. That's better, I acknowledged. More equitable. The best contracts. Protect everyone involved, not just the person with the most power, she said simply. We fell into conversation that somehow bypassed the usual professional networking and ventured into more substantive territory, judicial philosophies, the evolving nature of contract law in the digital age, even our shared appreciation for the hiking trails of the Olympic Peninsula. Sophia was not only intellectually engaging, but surprisingly easy to talk to, her analytical mind balanced by a warmth that differed from the calculated charm I often encountered in professional settings. When she eventually checked her watch and gathered her things, I felt an unexpected reluctance to end the conversation. I should return to my client, I said, glancing toward my table where the celebrating group hadn't seemed to notice my extended absence. And I have an early start tomorrow, she replied. Mount Sea Trail. It's supposed to be challenging, but worth it for the view. I know it well, I said truthfully. The view is spectacular. Would you like to join me? She asked. Directly, her invitation as straightforward as everything else about her. Fair warning, I start early. The question hung between us, weighted with implications that extended beyond a simple hiking invitation. Accepting meant more than agreeing to share a trail. It would be a step toward something new, something unprotected by prenuptial provisions or carefully constructed legal safeguards. I thought about the documents saved on my computer at home, a revised prenuptial template I had been developing as an intellectual exercise, incorporating elements of what I now thought of as the Anderson Provision 2.0. The updated version included Sophia's mutual enforcement concept, along with clauses designed to encourage open communication rather than just punish transgressions. I'd like that, I said finally, realizing I meant it, but I should warn you, I have trust issues. She smiled, the expression reaching her eyes in a way that made them crinkle at the corners. Good, so do I. That means we'll both read everything before we sign it. After she left, I rejoined my clients with a lighter step, participating in their celebration with newfound engagement. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I opened my computer and stared at the prenuptial template I had been refining. After a moment's consideration, I deleted the file entirely. Not because I had suddenly abandoned my belief in legal protections. That level of transformation wasn't possible in a single evening, but because I recognized that the document represented an approach to relationships I was beginning to question. One that prioritized protection over growth, consequences over understanding. The next morning, as I prepared for the hike with Sophia, I noticed one of Rebecca's smaller paintings still hanging in the hallway. I had kept it during the division of assets, not out of sentimentality, but because its abstract composition somehow suited the space. Looking at it now, I saw something I had missed before. Beneath the surface chaos of color and line was an underlying structure, a thoughtful balance of elements that created harmony from apparent discord. It struck me as an apt metaphor for what I was beginning to understand about relationships themselves. The legal frameworks I had relied on, culminating in the Anderson Provision, addressed the surface level of interaction, the explicit terms and boundaries. But they couldn't account for the deeper structures of connection, the implicit trust and vulnerability that made intimate relationships both risky and worthwhile. As I locked my apartment door, I realized I was stepping into unknown territory. Not just a hiking trail with a woman I barely knew, but a way of engaging with relationships that the detail hunter in me found profoundly unsettling. There were no guarantees, no clear provisions to enforce if things went wrong, no prenuptial agreement to protect my assets or heart. Yet something in Sophia's straightforward approach had resonated with a part of me that had been dormant since. Before Rebecca's betrayal, perhaps even before our marriage began, a willingness to see relationships not as legal constructs to be regulated, but as human connections to be nurtured, with all their inherent risks and potential rewards. The drive to the trailhead took me east of Seattle, away from the water and urban landscape toward the mountain vistas that had always provided perspective when legal complexities became overwhelming. Sophia was already there when I arrived, dressed in practical hiking gear that somehow managed to reflect the same effortless elegance I had observed in her professional attire. "Right on time," she noted with approval as I joined her. "I appreciate punctuality in hiking partners almost as much as in opposing counsel." The trail began moderately, before ascending more steeply through dense forest that occasionally opened to reveal glimpses of the surrounding landscape. We hiked in comfortable silence, punctuated by observations about the trail conditions or particularly striking views. There was none of the forced conversation that often characterized first encounters. No anxious filling of quiet moments with unnecessary words. As we climbed higher, the physical exertion loosened something in me, a tightness I hadn't recognized until it began to release. The methodical rhythm of placing one foot before the other, the steady regulation of breath, the gradual elevation that shifted perspective with each switchback, all combined to create a state where thoughts flowed more freely than they had in months. "Penny for your thoughts," Sophia said during a water break about 2/3 of the way up. We sat on a fallen log, looking out at the valley below where morning mist still clung to the contours of the land. "I was thinking about perspective," I admitted, "how distance changes how we see things." She nodded thoughtfully. "Both physical and temporal distance. Some things only make sense when you're far enough away to see the pattern. Like a marriage," I found myself saying. "Up close, in the daily interactions, you miss the larger dynamics. It's only afterward that certain patterns become clear." "Is that how it was with your marriage?" she asked, her directness still refreshing rather than intrusive. "Patterns you couldn't see until afterward?" I considered the question seriously. Yes and no. There were patterns I missed because I was too close, signs of Rebecca's dissatisfaction, moments when connection was possible but overlooked. But there were also patterns I missed because I was deliberately keeping my distance, protecting myself from the vulnerability of full engagement. "The prenup as emotional buffer," she observed. "Exactly. The Anderson provision was supposed to protect me from financial harm, but it also became a way of avoiding the risk of complete investment in the relationship." I looked out at the landscape, finding it easier to articulate these realizations while focusing on the distant horizon. In some ways, I had already left parts of myself out of the marriage before Rebecca ever met James. "Self-protection is a natural instinct," Sophia said, "especially after witnessing others' pain." I glanced at her, surprised by her insight. My father's divorce shaped my approach to relationships more than I realized. "Mine too," she said. "Simply, different circumstances, similar impact. My parents' marriage exploded in spectacular fashion when I was 15, affairs on both sides, vicious court battles, collateral damage everywhere." She took another sip of water before continuing. "I responded by becoming fascinated with contract law, the idea that relationships could be governed by clear agreements rather than volatile emotions. And now you write prenuptial agreements with mutual enforcement provisions," I said. understanding her professional choices in a new light. "Balance matters," she replied with a slight smile, "in contracts and in life." We resumed our hike, the conversation shifting to lighter topics as we tackled the steepest section of the trail. When we finally reached the summit, the view was everything I remembered: Mount Rainier dominating the southern horizon, the Cascade Range extending in all directions, Seattle visible as a distant cluster of buildings beside the shimmering Sound. "Worth the climb," Sophia said, breathing deeply as she surveyed the panorama. "Always is," I agreed. We found a comfortable rock formation and shared the lunch we had each brought: simple hiking fare of sandwiches, fruit, and trail mix. The conversation flowed easily between professional topics and more personal ones, neither of us pushing for more disclosure than the other was ready to offer, but both willing to engage beyond surface pleasantries. "Do you regret it?" Sophia asked eventually. "The way you handled the discovery of your wife's affair, the public confrontation?" The question might have felt intrusive from someone else, but her straightforward curiosity matched my own emerging need for honest assessment. "Parts of it," I admitted, "not the legal protection. The Anderson provision worked exactly as designed in that respect, but the public humiliation served no purpose except momentary satisfaction." "And the aftermath?" "Taking ownership of the gallery?" "That's more complicated," I said, considering how to express the evolution of my thinking. "Initially, it was simply enforcement of the prenuptial provisions. The gallery reverted to me because Rebecca had violated our agreement, but over time, it's become something different." "The foundation," she said, nodding. "I read about the restructuring. It's an unusual approach for an asset acquired through divorce proceedings." "It felt right," I said, simply. Destroying Rebecca's professional legacy wouldn't heal anything, and the gallery itself deserved to continue. The foundation model preserves what was valuable while creating something new that reflects different priorities. Sophia was quiet for a moment, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "That's, surprisingly nuanced for someone with a reputation as the detail hunter." Maybe the hunt for details led to unexpected discoveries," I suggested, surprising myself with the metaphor. As we began our descent, always more challenging than the ascent in different ways, I found myself reflecting on how this conversation with a virtual stranger had illuminated aspects of my experience that months of solitary analysis had failed to clarify. There was something powerful in articulating these thoughts aloud, in having them received without judgment or easy platitudes. Near the bottom of the trail, where the path widened enough for us to walk side by side, Sophia stopped suddenly. "I should tell you something," she said, her direct gaze meeting mine. "I didn't randomly run into you at Canlis 2 nights ago." "Oh?" I tried to keep my tone neutral, despite the sudden tension her words created. "I knew you were there with clients. A colleague mentioned seeing you." She adjusted her backpack straps, a gesture that seemed more about gathering resolve than physical comfort. "I deliberately went to the bar when I saw you step away from your table." "Why?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than alarmed. "Because I've been following the development of the Anderson provision since it first circulated in legal circles, because I wanted to meet the mind behind it, because—" She paused, then finished honestly. "Because I was curious about the person, not just the legal precedent." Her admission should have triggered my carefully honed suspicion, the protective instincts that had only been reinforced by Rebecca's betrayal. Instead, I found myself appreciating her honesty, the way she volunteered this information rather than waiting for it to be discovered. "Thank you for telling me," I said simply. "Most men would find it off-putting," she observed, "being researched before being approached." "I'm not most men," I replied, then added with unexpected humor, "I'm the detail hunter, remember? I can hardly fault someone else for doing their due diligence." She laughed, the sound echoing slightly in the forest around us. "Fair point." As we reached the parking lot, that awkward moment of transition that often concludes first encounters, I realized I wasn't ready for this conversation to end. Not because of any romantic impulse, though I found Sophia undeniably attractive, but because the quality of exchange itself felt valuable, a counterpoint to the isolation that had characterized my life since discovering Rebecca's affair. "There's a good brewery about 10 minutes from here," I suggested. "If you're interested in continuing this conversation somewhere less vertical." "I'd like that," she said without hesitation. "I'll follow you there." Driving toward the brewery, watching Sophia's car behind me in the rearview mirror, I felt something shift in my understanding of what had happened with Rebecca and the Anderson provision. The legal framework I had created had functioned as designed, protecting my financial interests and creating consequences for infidelity, but it had failed to address, had perhaps even contributed to, the deeper fractures in our connection. As I parked and waited for Sophia to join me, I realized that my father had been right during our dinner conversation. The legal aspects were always the easiest. It was the questions that remained afterward that required the real work of healing. Not through more perfect legal provisions, but through the messy, vulnerable process of genuine human connection. The Anderson provision had given me a victory on paper, but perhaps the real win would come from understanding what it had failed to protect and why, and finding the courage to engage differently in whatever came next. 6 months later, I stood in the Anderson Arts Foundation gallery, watching guests circulate through the new exhibition, Connections and Fractures, a showcase of emerging Pacific Northwest artists exploring themes of relationship and repair. The irony of the theme wasn't lost on me. In fact, I had suggested it to Mara, who had built a compelling curatorial narrative around the concept. The gallery had evolved significantly under the foundation model. Attendance had increased by 40%, grant funding had enabled new educational initiatives, and artists who might never have found representation in the gallery's previous incarnation were receiving critical attention and sales. What had begun as simply enforcing the prenuptial agreement had transformed into something with unexpected meaning and purpose. "Quite a success," said Sophia, appearing beside me with 2 glasses of wine. She handed me one, her fingers brushing mine in a casual intimacy that still surprised me with its ease. "Mara has a remarkable eye." "She does," I agreed, accepting. The wine with gratitude. Rebecca chose well when she hired her. The ability to mention Rebecca's name without the immediate sting of betrayal was relatively new. A development that had paralleled my evolving relationship with Sophia over the past months. We had taken things slowly, both of us carrying scars from previous relationships that made caution natural. Weekly hikes had expanded to include dinners, museum visits, even a weekend trip to Portland where we had deliberately avoided the gallery where Rebecca now worked. "Speaking of choices," Sophia said, nodding toward the gallery entrance, "your father and Catherine just arrived." I turned to see my father escorting his wife into the exhibition space, both dressed elegantly but comfortably for the cultural event. Catherine immediately gravitated toward a large mixed-media piece that dominated the north wall, while my father scanned the room, his eyes finding mine with a small nod of acknowledgement. Our relationship had deepened since our dinner conversation about walls and their costs. For the first time in decades, we had begun discussing emotional landscapes rather than just professional achievements, finding common ground in our experiences of betrayal and recovery. His approval of Sophia had been immediate but understated, expressed not in direct commentary, but in the way he included her naturally in family gatherings and sought her legal opinions on non-sensitive medical matters. I excused myself from Sophia to greet them, accepting Catherine's warm hug and my father's firm handshake. "The foundation is making quite a name for itself," he observed, surveying the crowded gallery. "This is more diverse than the typical Thursday night art crowd." "That's intentional," I explained. "The community access program Mara implemented brings in people who wouldn't normally feel welcome in spaces like this." "Your mother would approve," he said simply, the comment, delivered without the edge that once accompanied any mention of her. "Adaita duginstistita del." She always believed art belonged to everyone, not just those who could afford to buy it. As we talked, I noticed a subtle shift in my father's expression, a slight tensing that usually indicated discomfort. Following his gaze, I saw what had caused it. Rebecca had entered the gallery. Her appearance was unexpected but not shocking. Despite our history, she remained connected to Seattle's art community, and the exhibition featured several artists she had originally discovered. She looked different, her hair shorter, her style more subdued than during her days as the gallery's director. She moved carefully through the space, maintaining a respectful distance from the foundation staff while studying the artwork with genuine interest. "Do you want to leave?" my father asked quietly, his protective instinct surfacing. "No," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "This is fine." And it was, I realized. Seeing Rebecca didn't trigger the complex swirl of anger, hurt, and vindication that had characterized our divorce proceedings. Instead, I felt a muted sadness for what had been lost, coupled with an unexpected appreciation for what had emerged from the wreckage, not just the foundation, but my own evolution. Rebecca eventually noticed me watching her. After a moment's hesitation, she made her way across the gallery, stopping at a respectful distance. "Hello, Michael," she said simply. "The exhibition is extraordinary." "Mara's vision," I acknowledged. "She's taken the gallery in directions I never would have imagined." "Sometimes the best things emerge from unexpected circumstances," she observed, a hint of the old Rebecca showing through in the philosophical comment. The silence that followed wasn't exactly comfortable, but neither was it laden with the antagonism that had characterized our last interactions. It was, I realized, the silence of two people who had once shared everything and now occupied separate worlds, connected only by the remnants of a shared history. "Are you well?" I asked finally, the question genuine rather than perfunctory. "Getting there," she replied with similar honesty. "Portland has been good for me. Smaller scale, more focused work, less pressure to be something I'm not." I nodded, understanding what she meant without needing elaboration. Rebecca had always thrived in the curatorial role, bringing artists and audiences together, but the business aspects of gallery direction had been more obligation than passion. Perhaps the dissolution of our plans had freed her to find a more authentic path, just as it had ultimately done for me. "And James?" I asked, more out of curiosity than any desire to provoke. "New York," she said with a slight shrug. "His career is flourishing, though the critics have been harder on his recent work." She hesitated, then added, "We don't speak anymore. Turns out he had a pattern of relationships with gallery directors who could advance his career." There was no satisfaction in this confirmation of James's calculated approach to relationships, just a quiet recognition that people's actions often revealed their character more clearly than their words ever could. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. Whatever Rebecca had done, she deserved better than to be used as a stepping stone in someone else's career ambitions. "I'm not, actually," she replied, surprising me. "It was a valuable lesson, if an expensive one." She glanced meaningfully around the gallery that had once been hers before returning her gaze to me. The Anderson provision saw to that. There was no bitterness in her tone, just a clear-eyed assessment of consequences. I found myself respecting her ability to acknowledge this reality without descending into resentment or self-pity. Before I could respond, Sophia approached carrying a fresh glass of wine for me. She assessed the situation with the quick perception that made her such an effective attorney, extending her hand to Rebecca without hesitation. "Sophia Reyes," she introduced herself simply. "I've admired your curatorial work for years." Rebecca accepted the handshake, her expression revealing momentary surprise before professional courtesy took over. "Rebecca Taylor, thank you. Are you in the arts world?" "Securities law, actually," Sophia replied, "but art has always been a passion. I particularly appreciated your early support of Ana Mendiez before her work became fashionable." The conversation shifted to safer territory, specific artists, exhibition philosophies, the differences between the Seattle and Portland art scenes. I watched as these two women, connected through me in ways neither fully understood, engaged in a discussion that was genuine despite its careful boundaries. When Rebecca eventually excused herself to speak with one of the artists she had previously represented, Sophia turned to me with a questioning look. That was unexpectedly civilized. "Everything evolves," I said simply. "Even the aftermath of betrayal." She nodded, understanding what I meant without requiring elaboration, one of the qualities I had come to value most about her in our developing relationship. "The Anderson provision created consequences," she observed, "but it couldn't dictate how either of you would grow from them." "That's the limitation of legal frameworks," I acknowledged. "They address actions and outcomes, not the human capacity for change." As the evening progressed, I found myself contemplating how differently this scene might have unfolded had I encountered Rebecca 6 months earlier, when the wound of betrayal was still fresh and the satisfaction of legal victory still primary. In my mind, the Anderson provision had given me what I thought I wanted: protection, consequence, a clear resolution to a painful situation. But it had been the months that followed, the gradual reckoning with deeper questions of trust and connection, that had truly begun the healing process. Later that night, after the exhibition closing and a quiet dinner with Sophia, I returned to my apartment alone. Our relationship was progressing at a deliberately measured pace, both of us aware that rushing toward intimacy had its own risks, especially given our respective histories. I poured a single finger of scotch and stood at the window where I had once contemplated the wreckage of my marriage. The Seattle skyline glittered against the night sky, beautiful in its complexity, a view I had seen thousands of times but somehow noticed differently now. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "Thank you for tonight. Your response to unexpected situations continues to impress me." I smiled, appreciating both the sentiment and her characteristic directness. "The detail hunter is learning to see the bigger picture," I replied. Her response came quickly. "I'd say he always could. He just needed different glasses." The metaphor was apt. My attention to detail remained, the careful analysis that made me effective in both legal work and personal reflection. But I was beginning to understand that details without context created an incomplete picture, just as legal provisions without human understanding offered limited protection. The Anderson provision had functioned exactly as designed, protecting my financial interests and creating consequences for Rebecca's choices. But it had failed to address the deeper questions that lingered after betrayal. How do we trust again? How do we balance protection against the vulnerability required for connection? How do we move from the letter of agreements to their spirit? These questions had no simple legal answers. They required the ongoing work of self-examination, honest communication, and the courage to engage despite past wounds. The provision had given me a kind of justice, but healing had come from somewhere else entirely, from conversations with my father about his journey through similar terrain, from the unexpected purpose found in transforming the gallery into the foundation, from the gradual building of trust with Sophia. As I finished my scotch, I realized that perhaps the most valuable lesson wasn't about crafting better legal protections, but about developing the resilience to engage authentically, despite the risks inherent in human connection. The Anderson provision had been a shield against financial harm, but true protection came from internal strength rather than external safeguards. Rebecca's betrayal had activated the prenuptial clause, but it had also initiated a different kind of provision, the provision of insight that comes only through navigating difficult terrain. The legal document had protected my assets, but this hard-won wisdom might protect something more valuable, the capacity for meaningful connection despite past wounds. The detail hunter was still hunting after all, just with the expanded field, a vision and a deeper understanding of what was truly worth protecting. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.